My name is Emily Carter. I am 27 years old, and for most of my life I believed one thing with all my heart. My stepmother destroyed my family. Whenever people asked about her, I always told the same story. I said she came into our lives after my mother died and slowly took everything away from me. I said she changed our home, changed my father, and tried to erase the memory of the woman who raised me. For years, I truly believed she was the villain in my life. But I was wrong, and the truth changed me forever. I grew up in a small town, surrounded by fields and quiet roads, where everyone knew each other's names. Our house was old and simple, but when my mother was alive, it always felt warm. Every room carried her laughter. My father worked long hours repairing machines at a factory outside town. He was not a man of many words, but he loved deeply. My mother, on the other hand, filled every silence. She loved music, flowers, and making huge dinners even when there was no reason to. 3 of us at the table. When I was little, I believed nothing bad could ever happen to our family. Then I turned 13. That was the year my mother became ill. At first it seemed small. She was tired more often. She slept during the afternoons. She smiled less. But slowly the hospital visits became more frequent, and our happy home became quieter every week. One winter evening, my father sat beside me in the kitchen. His hands were shaking slightly as he held a cup of coffee. "Emily," he said softly, "your mother may not get better." I remember staring at the floor, because I was too scared to look at him. A few months later, my mother passed away. After that, the world changed. The house felt colder. My father stopped listening to music. Some nights I heard him crying quietly in his bedroom when he thought I was asleep. For several years, it was just the 2 of us, trying to survive our grief. Then one evening, everything changed again. I was 16 when my father told me he had met someone. Her name was Grace. The moment I heard those words, anger exploded inside me. "How could you do this to Mom?" I shouted. My father looked hurt immediately. "Emily, nobody could ever replace your mother," he said quietly. But I refused to listen. In my mind, loving someone new meant forgetting the person we lost. And I could not forgive that. The first time I met Grace, she stood nervously at our front door, holding a homemade pie. She had gentle eyes and spoke softly. "Hi, Emily," she said. "I've heard so much about you." I looked at her for only a second, before walking away without answering. That was the beginning of years of bitterness. Grace tried everything to connect with me. She asked about school. She remembered my birthday. She offered to help when I struggled. And every single time, I pushed her away. If she cooked dinner, I criticized it. If she tried talking to me, I ignored her. If she showed kindness, I treated it like manipulation. When my father married her a year later, I stood at the ceremony feeling nothing but resentment. After the wedding, Grace approached me carefully. "I know this is difficult," she said softly, "but I truly hope one day we can become a family." "You are not my family," I replied coldly. I still remember the pain in her eyes, but at the time I did not care, or at least I pretended not to. Years passed like that. I became an adult, got a job, and continued living in the same house. But the distance between Grace and me never disappeared. What made everything stranger was this. No matter how cruel I became, Grace never fought back. She never yelled, never insulted me, never told my father to choose between us. She simply stayed patient. At the time, I saw her silence as weakness. Now I understand it was love. But I only discovered that because of one terrible day. It happened during autumn. I came home earlier than usual because of heavy rain. The house was quiet, and I noticed the light inside my father's office was on. As I walked past the room, I saw Grace sitting at the desk surrounded by papers. When she noticed me, she looked startled. "What are you doing in there?" I asked sharply. She hesitated before answering. "I'm organizing some documents for your father." I stepped closer and froze. Medical reports, hospital papers, prescription forms. Fear suddenly tightened inside my chest. "What is this?" I whispered. Grace looked at me sadly. "Your father didn't want you to worry," she said carefully. My heart began racing. "Worry about what?" She lowered her eyes for a moment. "His condition has become worse." The room suddenly felt too small to breathe in. "What condition?" Grace's voice was almost a whisper. "His kidneys are failing." I felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. All those evenings he looked exhausted. All those moments he avoided conversations. I had noticed everything, but I had been too consumed by my own anger to ask why. Why didn't he tell me? I asked quietly. Grace looked at me with tears in her eyes. Because he was afraid of losing you emotionally before he lost you physically. I did not understand at first. Then she handed me a small notebook. These are letters he wrote for you, she said. My hands trembled as I opened the first page. Dear Emily, if you are reading this, it means I may not have enough time left to say everything I feel. I could not continue reading. Tears blurred the words. Then Grace said something I will never forget. Your father asked me to promise that I would always take care of you. I stared at her silently. For years, she continued softly, you believed I wanted to replace your mother. But Emily, I never wanted to replace anyone. I only wanted to protect the people your father loved most. Something inside me broke at that moment. For the first time in years, I questioned everything I believed. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen feeling nervous. Grace was making breakfast quietly. Normally, I would ignore her completely. But this time, I stopped. Good morning, I said softly. She looked surprised. Then she smiled gently. Good morning, Emily. It was such a small moment. But somehow, it changed everything. Later that evening, I sat beside her in the living room, holding my father's notebook. I read some of his letters, I said quietly. Grace nodded. There was silence for a moment, before I finally whispered the words I should have said years earlier. I'm sorry. Grace looked at me with kindness instead of anger. You were grieving, she said softly. Sometimes pain makes people build walls around their hearts. That night, we talked honestly for the first time. I told her how terrified I had been after losing my mother, how angry I felt when she entered our lives, how guilty I felt for slowly forgetting the sound of my mother's voice. And Grace listened to every word without judging me. Then she shared her side of the story. She admitted she had been scared too. She knew I hated her from the beginning, but she stayed because she loved my father and cared about me even when I rejected her. Every meal she cooked, every conversation she tried to start, every act of kindness, it had all been real. And suddenly, I realized something painful. The monster I created in my mind had never truly existed. Over the following months, our relationship slowly changed. It was not perfect overnight. Some wounds take time to heal. But little by little, we became closer. Sometimes we cooked dinner together. Sometimes we sat in the garden talking about life. And for the first time since my mother died, the house no longer felt so lonely. One evening, my father came into the kitchen and saw us laughing together while washing dishes. He became emotional immediately. I've dreamed about this for years, he whispered. I walked over and hugged him tightly. And in that moment, I understood something important. Love does not erase the people we lose. It simply makes room for more people inside our hearts. Today, my family is still imperfect. We still argue sometimes. We still carry old scars. But now our home is filled with understanding instead of resentment. And Grace, the woman I once hated, became one of the people I trust most in the world. Sometimes the people we push away are the ones fighting hardest to stay beside us. And sometimes forgiveness begins the moment we finally choose to see the truth.